This past Thursday night, St. Malachy hosted Cardinal Ritter's Baccalaureate Mass for the seniors there. And as the chaplain, I had that Mass. And as we were preparing in the back with some of the servers back in the sacristy, we were putting the hosts out into a ciborium. And one of the young men who was serving, who has had numerous discussions with me about his faith, and he's sort of wrestling with Catholicism, as most people do at that age. And he kind of picked up this in the back. And this is a roll of 100, right now, pieces of bread that we use to become hosts. And they're wrapped up in a little cellophane package. And he kind of looked at it and he said, "Father, this is, I guess, what I have a problem with. It's right here, and it's basically worthless. It's wrapped up in cheap plastic. The bread is essentially, worthless. No one would actually buy any of this bread to eat. And in a half hour or so, this is going to be Jesus who created the entire world." And he was like, "That's really, I guess, what I'm struggling with. And that's what I have a hard time with about the faith." And then and I didn't really say anything. I just okay, yeah, I know that is a challenge for us and a mystery. And then but eventually the way that he kind of ended it was he just said, "I guess I just need more time to think about it. I guess I just need more time to think about it." I think we all need more time to think about it. And our opening prayer today for the Mass of Corpus Christi, which is a prayer that we actually use all throughout the year whenever we are entering into Adoration, is this: "May our worship of this body and blood help us to experience the salvation you won for us. May our worship of this body and blood." If there's one thing that the Church and her saints agree on about the Blessed Sacrament, well, there's many things, obviously, but one constant message that we hear from the Church and the saints of the Church is this: that the Mass is not enough time for us to spend in contemplating the Eucharist and the Blessed Sacrament. That's not to say that the Mass is lacking in any way. It's just that the Church and her saints have always said we have to spend more time thinking about and contemplating the mystery that is the Eucharist. The Church gives us two different types of ways to do that. One is simply adoring Christ in the tabernacle, worshiping His presence, sitting in His presence. We do that here. Anytime we come in before Mass and sit in His presence, we are in His presence now, right there in the tabernacle. And all the Catholic churches throughout the world, that is an option for you at any time. Hopefully it's unlocked. We can go in and we can sit in His presence in the tabernacle and contemplate and adore and worship Him there. Another type of adoration or worship that the Church offers would be the exposition or exposing of the Blessed Sacrament, which we do here in Advent. We had after the noon Mass during the Sundays of Advent, we expose the Blessed Sacrament. And what we use for that, some people were asking, during that season, "Father, what was that on the altar?" That the tall thing with the big circle in the middle is called a monstrance, which is kind of a scary name. But all that is simply we place the host in the monstrance, and then we call that exposing the Blessed Sacrament. And again, it's not really any different than sitting in the presence of the tabernacle, other than we can now actually look upon the Eucharist. And so it just involves another sense, really, to see the Eucharist and be in His presence in that way as well. people ask, well, what's the point? What's the point of a monstrance? And really all that is just as we were saying, we need more time besides the Mass. That monstrance just preserves the high point of the Mass, which is, or kind of Christ's appearance at the Mass. When the priest elevates the host and shows the people the host, it's about this height, and the monstrance is about that height. So it's just kind of continuing through time, that part of the Mass where Christ comes into our presence for the first time. So we have that form of adoration and worship of the Blessed Sacrament as well. Lots of options. We have lots of places. In addition, we had the exposition here during Advent and Lent, I believe. We also have exposition during First Fridays here in the church. We also have the option of adoring Christ in the tabernacle at the old church. There's a Blessed Sacrament chapel that's open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, for us to come in and sit in the presence of Christ. There's also every deanery in the diocese has a perpetual adoration chapel where Christ has been exposed, is exposed year-round, except for Good Friday. Ours is at St. Michael's, and I spend a lot of mornings there myself getting ready for school. A lot of the saints encourage us to do this. I would say in my first year of priesthood, the one thing, if I could really give thanks for one thing that's kind of sustained me, there's been many things that have sustained me, but I think the biggest thing is having that time of adoration in the morning or whenever I'm able to work it in. Just being in His presence. And a lot of times, people say, well, what happens? And I like to think of St. John Vianney's quote, which was, people were asking him, what do you do when you're in adoration? You get distracted, what goes on? And he says, well, I sit in His presence and I stare at Him and He stares back at me. And that's enough. And I think that's just a beautiful analogy, or not an analogy, a beautiful description of what takes place when we sit in His presence and when we worship Him, as our opening prayer encourages us to. So let us be in His presence. Let us be people who spend time outside of Mass, worshiping and contemplating and adoring the Blessed Sacrament. As we said in our opening prayer, may our worship of this body and blood help us to experience the salvation that He won for us. And may the way we dress, the way we enter church, the way we receive Him when we come forward for communion, and may the way we live our lives show to people the power that is in the Blessed Sacrament.